In this Photoshop tutorial, we're going to take a look at the 10 worst things about Photoshop. Well, maybe not the 10 worst things about Photoshop, but 10 terrible things that you want to avoid doing, and hopefully 10 things that are going to help elevate your work and make your stuff look so much better. Let's get started right now. Hey everybody, welcome into this Photoshop tutorial brought to you by tutvid.com. I'm here in Vermont, and I just had to shoot a quick video. This is a video I've been working on for a little while, so I figured before I get home from my little vacation, I would shoot a video. Now, today we're going to talk about kind of the 10 things you want to avoid in Photoshop, and we've all seen sort of those techniques, smoothing skin by blurring it. I'm not going to get into like the obvious stuff like that, over retouching the eyes that make your eyes just look absolutely insanely awful. I mean, let's be honest. And of course, stuff like, black and white desaturate instead of using like gradient maps or the black and white adjustment layer, things like that. I'm going to stay away from stuff like that. We're going to talk about 10 other things, techniques and tools that I think you should kind of stay away from if and when you're using Photoshop. So let's go ahead and jump into Photoshop and take a look at what we've got here. I'm just going to adjust my screen a little bit because I'm outside. The number one thing that I would say to avoid, and the number one thing that kind of tells me, hey, this is a kind of a novice Photoshop user, if you will, is a kind of use at all or overuse of the Bevel and Emboss filter. So I've got this text here, Nashville, and now don't get me wrong, there are good ways or okay ways to use Bevel and Emboss, but it seems like I want to say 99% of the time Bevel and Emboss is used, or that you notice Bevel and Emboss, it's used really badly. So I've got this text layer. I'm going to go layer style, Bevel and Emboss, and of course we can just kind of blow this out. I actually don't have everything set at kind of its default, but when you go ahead and blow this out, you get kind of this crazy, text that's not looking very good. I'll put it to you that way. I got my shadow there. Great. I can increase the size a little bit. And you get kind of this, like, funky, bulbous-looking text. It doesn't look very good at all. So if you want to use Bevel and Emboss, kind of the best way or the most useful way I've found, and of course you'll discover different ways as you become more and more experienced with Photoshop, but probably the best way that I've found to use Photoshop is to either completely get rid of the shadow or completely get rid of the highlight and just use it as like an additional inner shadow or inner glow. It actually works a little bit differently than inner shadow and or inner glow, and gives you some additional and other controls that can be really useful to have. So that's usually what I do, is I'll come in and I'll get rid of like the shadow. As you saw, I just had to boost shadow back up because the project I was working on before I started recording this, I was using, I guess, the highlight for something. So just using highlight mode, it allows you to run just a highlight along whatever bit of text you have. I'm going to hit OK here. My text, maybe I need to change the color. I'll go with like this pink or something, and the hotkey there is just Option Delete. That'd be Alt Backspace on the PC. I can double click on my text out here. It brings me back to my layer style dialog box. I can choose Bevel and Emboss, and you can see it's like a very soft highlight. So I can reduce the size. I can change the technique to something like chisel hard, like I had it set to. For now, I'm going to reduce the size to maybe like 3, and you can see I just get this kind of highlight right above my text, and without adding shadow back into it, which I feel like starts to kind of, I don't know, cheapen the effect a little bit. It looks a little bit like a drop shadow there, but not really. It kind of cheapens the effect in my mind. So I don't really like to do that. Again, if I'm just getting rid of the highlight and I just want to bring some shadow along the bottom of the letters, I can do that as well. And of course, you got all your blend modes, everything as normal. So I would say number one, avoid Bevel and Emboss in general. But if you do use it well, and don't overuse it. And the more you use Photoshop and get used to working with these tools, the more you'll kind of be able to look at your Bevel and Emboss and say, that's not a really good that's not such a good usage of Bevel and Emboss. Before we go on, I want to take a quick moment and just remind you guys that I'm selling a course all about how to retouch images in Photoshop. There's a lot of these kind of faux pas that you'll see me not using, hopefully, in the course. I've got a link to the course right up here in this corner of the video, wherever it is. I don't know if my finger's off screen. I'm not usually shooting here in Vermont, So go ahead and check out that course. If you pick up a copy, it supports tutvid.com, and it would be amazing. Let's move along to the next thing. So the next thing is Selective Color. And Selective Color it's kind of been a faux pas for a while. It's kind of one of those blunders that you see in Photoshop. On occasion, it can be done well, but for the most part, it's like the equivalent of like the photographer's girl standing on a railroad track with, you know, a guitar on her shoulders or something. So it's not really the greatest thing. I'm going to go ahead, and I don't have my tablet out here with me, but I'm going to go ahead and just, I'm going to give this a gradient map, and I'm going to make it a black and white gradient map so we get a nice black and white image. Now, I create the black and white image, and then I would use something like color range and just, you know, well, here, let's give it a shot. I didn't even pre-run this, but let's go color range and just select her shirt here, or her blouse, maybe I should say. Let's go ahead and just keep adding color. Whoop, we've added too much color. Let's go ahead and add color. And, you know, I mean, you would go through this and just add a bunch of color, so we would only have the red, hit OK. Now, obviously, that's the blouse is now the only thing that's been converted to black and white, so select your mask, Command or Control-I to flip it, and you can see everything's black and white except kind of her shirt. It's not the greatest selection, but it'll work for this. That's selective color. I don't really have an alternative to selective color other than shoot great photos, get a great piece of glass, a great lens, shoot sharp photos in great light. I got the sun bearing down on me here, so this particular shot is not a good example of that. I did try to stick a sheet up there, but the wind kept blowing it down, courtesy of the winds whipping over the Vermont mountains to my, well, over my shoulder, I should say. So I'm dealing with the light that I've got. But in general, you want to shoot in beautiful light, find pockets of shadow, use a great lens. A full-frame camera is great if you can get your hands on it. Shoot great photos, avoid selective color. That's kind of my solution for that. Next up, we've got teeth whitening. Now, when you hear the term whiten teeth, you think, oh, make them white, right? Well, you don't actually want to make them white, because if we, let's zoom in here on his teeth, they can stand to be brightened up a little bit. So if we go to like black and white adjustment, and we would make them black and white, right? Actually, what I like to do before I even do that is create my mask. So I'll go hit the letter Q to enter quick mask mode, grab my brush tool, make my brush smaller. Make my brush a little bit smaller. There we go. I'm painting with black, and I'm just going to roughly paint over his teeth, just like this. I'll speed the video up here so you don't have to sit here and suffer through watching me slowly paint. And by the way, I'm slowly painting. Why? Because I don't have my tablet, so I'm just working here with the trackpad on my MacBook. All right, so I've got this selection painted. I hit the letter Q. It's going to load it as a selection. By the way, you may have to double-click on your quick mask mode and just make sure color indicates is set to selected areas. Otherwise, the area you paint is the area that won't be selected. I like to think of it as painting a selection. Hit the letter Q, and it loads it as a selection. Let's just delete this black and white adjustment layer. And now when I add a black and white adjustment layer, it's going to just convert his teeth to black and white. It's already looking a little weird, right? Because it's gray. Teeth aren't really gray. And then if I take yellow and I brighten yellow, and I take reds and I brighten them a little bit, and I take, I don't know, a little magenta. I mean, basically you can brighten everything, right? Because after all, teeth are supposed to be white. Right? But you can see, obviously, if I make them white, he starts to look more like sort of a strange love child between Bryan Cranston and the Yeti. It's a really weird look we've got going on here. So we don't want that. The solution is simply to tone it back. Tone it back. Tone it back. And maybe even over brighten a little bit so you can reduce the overall opacity of the black and white layer, so you can bring some of that natural color that he had back into the teeth. Again, we don't really want the teeth to be completely devoid of color. These aren't veneers. So maybe we want to just reduce the opacity to like 70 to 80%, allow some of that natural color to kind of float back into his teeth, and we can see there's before, there's after. And again, if it's still too bright, you can always go in and just knock down the brightness. Make sure that the teeth aren't, you don't want them jumping out of his mouth, I'll put it to you that way. So you want it to be an effect that blends in. And you blend by reducing opacity and just reducing the overall effect. All right, let's move on to the next thing. So the next thing, I don't really have anything to show you in Photoshop other than, well, I say that, and then here I'm going to create a shape. Let's say I create just a rectangle here, right? I can export the kind of the properties of this rectangle, surrounding this rectangle, as something like CSS by right-clicking on the layer and choosing a copy CSS. Then I can go over to something like Dreamweaver or Brackets or Coda or any kind of code editing software that you may have, and I can paste that code, and it will, in theory, give me the CSS that would draw this square using an HTML element or attaching the styles to an HTML element. However, pretty much every feature in Photoshop that allows you to export code exports pretty bad code. It's complex, it's complicated, And why wouldn't it be? Because how are the developers really supposed to know exactly how you're using that particular shape, that gradient, that drop shadow, whatever, in your document? But that being said, everything's absolutely positioned with CSS. There's Z indexes added to everything because everything's absolutely positioned, and it's just generally a mess. So the solution for that obviously is learn how to write CSS and HTML on your own or outside of using Photoshop as a crutch. I honestly think it'll save you time. It'll be a little bit of a learning curve initially, but it will be so much faster. Hear all that wind? Wow. All right, so I can just go ahead and delete this rectangle layer, and let's move on to the next image. Now, then this next effect, I'm actually going to rasterize this layer because we're going to reconvert it to a smart object in a moment. Using too much HDR, high-pass filter, unsharp mask, or the clarity slider in the camera raw editor, they pretty much all do the same thing. I'll show you a couple examples here and kind of how to rectify them. I'm going to duplicate this layer, Command or Control J. With this layer selected, I'm going to hit Command Shift U to convert it to black and white. Then I'm going to go Filter, Other, High Pass. So we're going to do the adding too much high pass effect. And I'm going to set the radius here to, I don't know, like 18, something like that. Yeah, that looks pretty good or pretty bad. And you can see we're getting this kind of like crazy effect here. And then if I set this to something like Overlay, and then maybe I duplicate it a time or two, you start to get this very, like, I don't know how to describe it other than if you follow any sports accounts on Instagram, you'll see this effect. It's not like the greatest effect. It's a very sort of cheap, dirty, fake drama-infused effect, which if it's all you got, I'm not going to knock you for it, but if you really want to learn Photoshop and get good at Photoshop, this probably isn't really what you want to do. There are other ways to infuse drama using color and lighting and focus and things like that that are much more subtle, much more beautiful, and a little bit more accepted in the commercial world, if you will. So what's the solution for this? Well, if you do want to add that mid-tone punch, which is understandable, add kind of that stuff that almost makes the edges and the highlights look a little bit brighter and darker, respectively, you would just do essentially what you just did. I tend to like to use the soft lights blend mode instead. Got stuff blowing on my desk here, and I like to reduce the opacity of that effect. So I'm just kind of pouring some of that effect in rather than just blowing out my image with this massive amount of mid-tone punch. So I'm going to delete that. The other thing you can do is if you right-click and choose Convert to Smart Object, and then we go Filter, Camera Raw Filter, you can achieve that same kind of bad effect, and I'm sure you've seen this in photos before, by just cranking that clarity slider way up. I mean, crank it way up, and now even also with the dehaze slider, by cranking that up. I mean, you can see this effect you get. It's too much. It's just too much. And again, as is usually the case with something like this, the solution is simply moderation. Just temper the amount of this that you're pouring into your image, and your image is just going to look better. Whoop, let me go back to my clarity slider and just pull some of that away. So sometimes it may look like the photo really needs it. Sometimes it's really nice to use the adjustment brush in the Camera Raw editor, pump up a ton of clarity, and add it to like the sky. If let's say you're photographing an air show or something, add it to the sky. It really helps bring out the clouds and things like that. But for the most part, when you're doing portraits and different images, landscapes, you just tend to get a lot of haloing. It happens with HDR stuff. It happens with unsharp mask, and it's going to happen with your clarity slider, dehaze slider, and adding just too much high pass via a high pass layer like we just did. The solution, again, just tone it back, which is almost always the case with Photoshop. Bring the effect beyond where it should be and tone it back and find that sweet spot. It's such a great way to work in Photoshop. You'll really find your work gets a lot nicer. So the next thing is retouching directly on a layer. So if I zoom in here, whoop, I don't want to create a new layer. If I zoom in here on these girls, whoop, here we go. And let's say I want to, let's say I want to get rid of her eye or something, like something ridiculous, right? I could use Spot Healing Brush, I could use Healing Brush, I could use the Patch Tool. Maybe we'll try the Patch Tool. I could just, draw a loop here around her eye. There's a very rough loop, and drag it up to her forehead, and it's going to kind of paste in and get rid of her eye, right? And we're like, oh, great, we did a great job. We didn't do a great job, but let's just, hypothetically here, we did a great job. Well, the real problem with this is not that we went and got rid of her eye. The real problem is we did this destructively. And it is very destructively, because if we save this and we send it off to the client and they say, hey, you know what, I actually think I like the way I look with two eyes a little bit better than one, you're up the creek without a paddle. If you've done a bunch of retouching to this, you have to go find the raw image that you shot in your camera and start from scratch. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is tools like the patch tool, the healing brush tool, clone stamp, content aware move. They allow you to work on a new layer. You don't have to work on that layer. So if you work on a new layer, if the time comes to get rid of that effect or tone the effect back, it's a matter of either hiding the layer or just scrolling back the opacity a little bit. So if I create a new layer here, I zoom in. And let's use the healing brush here. I can choose from here sample current and below, of course, right? So I can hold down Alt or Option, sample her forehead, and go ahead and paint over the eye wherever I like. I'm just watching here, making sure I don't get too close to her hair. My sample point, there we go. That's probably good for that. I'm going to resample here, and I can go ahead and just paint over her eye. And it doesn't look great, but then again, should it? And now I can back out and look, and her eye is gone again. It's a horrific healing job. I'm not focused on that. But the point is, I can always just hide this layer and bring her eye right back. So working on a new layer, and again, well, not again, I haven't showed you yet, but things like, I believe, spot healing brush, yeah, you can choose to sample all layers, which will allow you to work up on your own layer, or a new layer, I should say. Patch tool as well, you can sample all layers. Content aware move, you're going to have the same thing, sample all layers. And clone stamp, you'll have the same option as the spot healing brush, where you can choose where to sample from, or from where you would like to sample. I typically work on current and below. So when you're retouching, think non-destructive. Can I do this on a new layer that I can get rid of later if things go to hell in a handbasket, quite frankly? So here we go. Next up, we have applying adjustments. So Photoshop has all these amazing adjustments under image adjustments, brightness, contrast, levels, curves, all this stuff that we know and that we love. The problem is when I add this stuff, so if I go curves and I say, all right, I'm going to pump the contrast here on this guy, and I hit OK, and then I save the file and I come back a week later, the effect is set in. I would have to, again, retouch this entire image because I performed a destructive edit. You following a theme here? Non-destructive editing is valuable, and we have all these things under layer, new adjustment layer, they're called adjustment layers, and you can apply these amazing adjustments up on their own layer. So make sure you use adjustment layers. They're so stinking helpful. I'm going to go color balance. Oh, actually, by the way, you can go window adjustments and open up this amazing little adjustment panel that has all of these icons. There's color balance right there. Boom. Now my color balance, if I say I want to make more magenta and blue and red, great. And I put my properties away. I send it off to the client, and they say, I hate the color treatment. Hey, no problem. I can hit the little eyeball, shut it off, and send them the original image or whatever they liked. Or I can go in and just adjust my color balance whenever I want. I can go to the shadows and say, you know what, I'm going to pump some more blue and some cyan and maybe a little magenta into the shadows, and I'm really going to make the image go crazy. And then if that's too much, I can always just reduce that opacity and bring it back to wherever you or the client feels is fit. That's the power of adjustment layers, and you can do this after you've saved the image. You can come back a week, a year, a month, whenever later, and make all the changes that you wish. So the last non-destructive thing that I want to talk about is filters. So when you apply a filter, let's just take this young lady here, and let's go filter, let's go pixelate mosaic, because why not? And we apply this kind of mosaic effect. Let's go maybe 45 pixels for our block size. Great. Well, there we go. The filter is over. It's done. We can do no more with it. That's it. So I don't really like that because, number one, if I save it, my image is gone. Basically, I've destroyed my image. I don't know if this is the effect that I want to keep yet. So I would like options. Well, you do have options. All you have to do is right-click on your layer and choose to convert it to a smart object. When you convert any layer to a smart object, any filter you apply to that layer becomes what's called a smart filter. And smart filters, you can always go back and adjust. Let's take a look. So I'm going to go filter, pixelate, mosaic. And I'm going to use the same exact effect, 45 pixels square, hit OK. And you can see I've got this little toggle down arrow here, and I can see here I have mosaic listed. Well, number one, I can shut it off, so that's great. I also have this mask, or I can double-click on the name mosaic and bring it up and say, you know what, let me try like 65 pixels square. That looks a little bit more discrete. We also have this little icon over here that I can double-click, which is your blending options. That allows me to just straight up reduce the opacity, not of the layer, but of the actual filter that's being applied. So you can see I get kind of this square effect over her. I can try mixing it with, like, what does that look like if I multiply it or soft light it or any number of things. I'm just going to go back to normal here because I want to show you something else. I'm going to set the opacity to 100 as well. Hit OK. We also have this mask. So I can actually mask the filter as well. So I'm going to go with my gradient here. I've got a black and white gradient. I'm going to drag from the top, actually. So I'm going to start up here. I'm going to drag it right down like this. And well, maybe I'll drag it down a little bit further. something like that. So you can see we have this mosaic effect fading into our original image, and it looks pretty cool. And we can always just select the layer, right, and we can go filter. Let's say we want to add, I don't know, let's just go motion blur or something. So you want to add this kind of vertical blur to it, right? It's from a tutorial that I just did or just released recently. You can see it just throws down there. Not only do I have the mosaic filter now, but I also have the motion blur filter, and it's being affected by that same mask. So that's all pretty cool. And anytime you want, you can hide the motion blur, and we're back to where we were. You could hide the mosaic, and you'll just have the motion blur, and so on and so forth. Smart filters are incredibly powerful, and of course, the winning feature of the smart filters feature is the fact that they are non-destructive. So stop applying your filters directly to your layers. Use smart objects. You certainly will not regret it. All right, so from that, let's go on and look at the next thing that you want to avoid. It's really not so much avoid as don't forget about, and that is if you're using Creative Cloud, you have access to the incredible Typekit library, and this is amazing. I mean, you have all of these different fonts. With one click, you can import them right into Photoshop, and if you have Creative Cloud, they're yours. They're yours to use. You don't have to go out and drop $700 on a font pack. You don't have to go out and hunt through Font Squirrel for 6 hours for the perfect font, although Font Squirrel is an amazing website if you're into free fonts, so don't sleep on Font Squirrel. But you can see you have so many amazing fonts. There's all kinds of stuff. You can search Typekit if you're looking for something specific. You can change the classification. Like I just want to see sans serif fonts, and it's going to bring up all these amazing sans serif fonts. You can just go and choose this, Hobo Roco or whatever this is called, and you can just choose Sync, and it's going to bring it right into your version of Photoshop via Creative Cloud. So if I grab my type tool now and I type, I don't know, John, you can see we have the font that we were using earlier with Nashville. I'm going to fill this with the color yellow. I'm going to hit Command or Control T. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Right, I'm going to set it there. Then I'm going to go Window, Character, which is my character panel. It's got all my type. And what was it called? It was called like Roco, Boco or something. Let's go down to the R's and see if it transferred. Doesn't look like it has finished transferring. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to transfer, but it will come in, and you can see, in fact, I can just choose this little icon here to show only fonts I've got. Hey, there it is. It just showed up. Show only fonts that I've gotten from Typekit, and there we go. It's that easy. It's so much faster than going out, finding, downloading, installing a font. You jump on the Typekit, grab the font, hit the sync button, boom, it's in Photoshop, and you can use it. So useful. And like I said, when you open up your font drop-down, you can hit the little Typekit icon to show only fonts you've gotten from Typekit. You can see I've got just a handful of them here that I've used, because even I shouldn't say even I, that sounds super pretentious, but lowly little I don't even use Typekit as much as I should. So this is as much a reminder for myself as it is for anybody out there watching. So use Typekit. It's free. It's at your fingertips. It's amazing. And there's so much great stuff out there. So yeah, it's that easy. Typekit. All right, let's go on to the next and the last thing. So the final thing is clean edges for composites. I can't tell you how many times I come across composite images that the lighting is great. The perspective is like spot on. The subject matter is amazing. Got this beautiful background, and you can just see the edges of the composite all around. Now, I'm not going to go through a full tutorial on how to cut somebody out. This is more of a public service announcement type thing. Use the tools Photoshop has given you. I'll try to link up here. I believe it'll be this corner of the video. I'll try to link to a tutorial that I have done on it. It's an advanced tutorial on cutting out hair. I talk about decontaminating edge color. I actually talk about refine edge because it's before Select and Mask came out. I'm working on a Select and Mask video now, but a lot of the principles are the same. Channel-based selections, calculations. You really want to make sure you get a nice, clean edge. And if you have to, don't be afraid to throw a mask on that layer, right? So if I just go around her with like my quick selection tool, and I'm going to create a very, very quick rough selection. If I were to do this, and this is not going to work very well here because I really have to go around the edges and hit everything with the quick selection tool. But if I were to create this selection and pop her up onto a new layer, let's say, Command or Control J. Whoops, I want to inverse my selection, of course, so select inverse, and then Command or Control J to pop her up on a new layer. And I select my original layer here. Whoop, my mistake, and fill it with yellow. You can see there's a lot of areas that are rough. There are a lot of areas that are crunchy, that I don't have good edge opacity, right? Like, at the very least, you should look at that and say, that's not acceptable. That is not good enough. So either go around very carefully with a soft edge brush and touch it up, or the real problem is you just haven't gotten a really, really great, really in-depth selection, and things like channels, calculations, select and mask. The old refine edge tool was amazing at it. Select and mask. Jury's still out on that. But it does have some of the same tools, and in theory, you'll be able to get a great edge that will really capture the opacity, the matte color, everything that is along your edges. But don't be afraid when you have an image like this to just select it and throw a mask onto it, and grab the brush tool and just manually go in. Where is my? Oh, there it is. Manually go in and like paint black and just paint away. Like, oh, I don't like that little bit that's sticking out. And just get rid of it. Things like that. Don't sleep on clean edges for your composites. They're so incredibly important. And you can also select an object like this and go like layer, matting, and go ahead and defringe the edge, or if there's like just a little like 1 pixel of white, sometimes we'll create what we think is an amazing selection. There's like one little white edge annoyingness. Go ahead and hit remove white matte. A lot of times it'll just zip that right away. And you can also do stuff like, color decontaminate right from here, where you get rid of like a color that's seeping in on the edges of your cutout object, and so on and so forth. So don't forget to just try to get nice clean edges for your subjects, especially when you're working on composites. It really makes a world difference. It takes you from that pretty good to really good realm. It's really, really important. So, for 10 things that you should avoid in Photoshop, from the awfully overused bevel and emboss to all of the destructive editing that I despise deep in my heart so much, to things like Typekit and clean selection edges for your composites. And by the way, I will link that tutorial. That's it. Get it? Got it? Good. Nathaniel Dodge from Tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one.